So what's up people and welcome to the chapter 24 discussion of Choujin X. So chapter 24 came out a few weeks ago, and as always I will leave a link to this chapter that's currently being shown on the publisher's official website, Manga Plus, for free to the North American audience. So if you're interested, I will go take a look at it before they pull this chapter back. Now chapter 24. Typically I don't make a video for Choujin X until 2 chapters come out, but after reading chapter 24 a few times and thinking about it, I decided to make a single chapter video because I feel chapter 24 is special, and in many ways it defines something specific to this manga series. And many people I think would agree with me that Sui Ishida was somewhat trolling the readers when they were going through the early chapters up till 24, because what we thought we were reading was the manga story. But what we find out in 24 is that what we were reading was the prequel to the manga story. Now chapter 24 mostly covers the situation with Azuma. If you recall, in chapter 23, we finally came to the end of the battle between Azuma and the Yamato Mori organization. He was going completely rogue after Ririka had brought him to a near-death situation. And by itself, that would have been fine since Ririka was basically acting like a terrorist by trying to capture Tokyo and taking down anybody else who would get in her way, such as Ellie. However, at this point, Azuma was way beyond control and went after the Yamato Mori himself, including Tokyo. And if you recall in chapter 23, he almost took out Tokyo, and it was at that time that Tokyo somewhat awakened to his really powerful state. And if you recall in the earlier chapters, the leader of that mysterious group that was distributing the Choujin serum was saying that they were looking for the chosen one, the bird Choujin that was the chosen one. And we weren't really sure what that meant until we saw the awakened version of Tokyo. And that version destroyed Azuma. And the chapter ended with Azuma completely defeated and Tokyo somewhat saving him after he took him down. So chapter 24 starts out with Azuma now at the Yamato Mori, and we see him reflecting on the situations that happened earlier. And this chapter is basically him trying to get in terms with his new Choujin state. And in fact, the chapter starts out with Sandek having a discussion with Azuma and telling him the problems that he seems to have inherent with his Choujin powers, which is that he cannot seem to control himself once he becomes a Choujin. He succumbs to the aggressive feelings that he has once he transforms. Those aggressive feelings were probably there, even in human form, but in that form, it actually benefited him because it gave him the ability to fearlessly take on anybody who was causing problems. And so he was acting as a hero. But once he turned into his Choujin form, it went against him, and he became so aggressive that he could not control his powers, and he literally attacked anyone who got in his way. If I were to compare it to a Western character, he basically went Incredible Hulk and smashed everybody around him. And so chapter 24 brings out Azuma trying to understand this characteristic and why it's giving him problems once he transforms. And we're starting to understand as well some of the differences between Azuma and Tokyo. When we read the earlier chapters, we noticed that Tokyo never really seemed to fully leverage his powers. He always seemed to not be as powerful as some of the other Choujin, such as Ellie or Momoma, for example. And that is because of his characteristic, which is always to hold back. He has always been a person who seems to not really want to come out. And when he is in human form, that tends to put him in a sort of beta situation. And as we found out in chapter 23, Asuma has always noticed that with regards to Tokyo holding back on his true power. And Asuma knew even from the early days that Tokyo actually was a lot stronger than he pretended to be. And throughout this early chapters, I felt that it had somewhat hindered him to be able to utilize his Choujin powers in the most effective way. But what we find out when we compare Asuma to Tokyo is that by holding back, he has been able to control his Choujin powers so that it does not go out of control the way we saw with Asuma. Sure, there are characters such as Ellie, who seem to be able to control their powers by being extremely conscious of the capability and making sure that it doesn't go out of control while being able to fully utilize its powers. However, in many of these transformations, since Choujin powers come out from the desires that the person has, if the desire becomes extremely powerful, the way we saw in Asuma, or similarly, the way we saw in Shiozaki when he became that baseball Choujin, they lose control of their persona and by doing so become a threat to humanity. Since Tokyo is also a transformation sort of Choujin rather than just a power Choujin as we see in Momoma or Ellie, there is a possibility that he will succumb to his Choujin persona. But because his human persona was so held back, I think it helped control him to not go out of control despite his transformation. And it is by comparing Asuma to Tokyo that we finally see this difference of how he's holding back may potentially be beneficial to his transformations in the long run. I'm not sure about this since we have only seen Asuma under that first condition. And for all we know, because he is such a proactive character, he may be able to get his powers under control earlier than Tokyo without having to hold it back the way Tokyo has been doing. Now, what we do find out, of course, in chapter 23 is once Tokyo does get awakened, his powers are far, far superior at this time to any of the other Choujins out there. And we do notice the discussions that are going on in the Yamato Mori between people like Shion, Ellie, and Momoma, that they noticed just how powerful Tokyo could become. And what's interesting is Ellie has always somewhat understood the potential of Tokyo and was not surprised in his ability to become more powerful. Now, since chapter 24 revolves around Asuma, it is Asuma witnessing that discussion about Tokyo's great strength that once again reflects upon Tokyo's abilities versus his. And this is a complete reflection towards what his original persona was, what his original dream was, and his relationship with Tokyo. As known from the previous chapters, Asuma has always wanted to be a hero. But more so than that, he always wanted to be admired by Tokyo. And throughout this entire past, we are seeing reflections in this chapter where Asuma had experienced such admiration from Tokyo. But of course, with this transformation and this battle, Tokyo has now surpassed Asuma, and Asuma has to figure out how to control his own powers, even though they're not as powerful compared to Tokyo once they are awakened. And Sandek has discussed with Asuma that he will be taking Asuma under his tutelage to somehow help him get under control. And I love the symbolism that came out at the very end, although I am not really certain of what the symbolism means. Throughout these few chapters, we have always seen this short appearance of this talking hyena that will come up and converse with Asuma. And throughout these chapters, we were like, what exactly is this hyena? Because it was never explained by Sui Ishida. And this is once again very characteristic Sui Ishida writing. He doesn't explain a lot of things, and he leaves it up to you to try to figure out what his symbolism means. And so in chapter 24, after Azuma is reflecting over how the earlier admiration by Tokyo has now changed to Tokyo surpassing Azuma, he notices that the hyena that he has talked to has fallen over and is dying. And it really is hard to understand exactly what Sui Ishida wants to say with regards to this hyena. But from my perspective, the hyena represents Azuma, or at least maybe his former self, in that with this recent battle, that relationship that he so wanted with Tokyo, the one where Tokyo admired him, no longer existed. That relationship has died. And if you look at this chapter with the hyena, not only is the hyena dying, but there seems to be many birds around him consuming the hyena's dying flesh. And it is Azuma that goes completely ballistic and chases the birds away, and you notice him crying while holding the dying hyena. So is this, once again, a symbolism of his past self? And is he crying because he understands that he no longer can go back to that side? This hyena will die, and there's nothing he can do about it. And the birds that were pecking on him, is that the symbolism of Tokyo's advancement as the bird Choujin to go beyond Azuma's capability? I am not sure. I cannot really understand this part of the story, but I feel the symbolism is very important, and my feeling is Azuma will be changing in the future. And that is when we come to the point of why I feel these previous chapters up till now were a prequel to the true story coming up. Because it is at this point that Sui Ishida, for the first time, explains what Choujin X is. He starts talking about the fact that every once in a while there comes an extremely powerful Choujin, a Choujin whose powers far surpasses anybody else's, and history always gets affected by the actions of that Choujin, whether for good or for evil. And while we watch Azuma cry, holding the hyena, we find out that those certain Choujin are called Choujin X. And so, with this entire chapter, we are introduced to two major characters, Tokyo and Azuma, with the powers coming in. And the question that comes up is, are either of these Choujin X, which I think is yes? And the next question is, which one? And the obvious answer will be Tokyo, and I still think that that is the case. But with Sui Ishida, you never, ever really know what's going on. His stories can flip on a dime, and certain characters who you thought were protagonists can become antagonists very quickly. How will Azuma grow? Right now, the biggest challenge is not to Tokyo, but to Azuma, because he knows that his Choujin powers are out of control. And are we talking about the instability of Azuma as the possible potential for the saving or the destruction of humanity? Or are we talking about Tokyo, because Tokyo is the one that has the ultra powerful Choujin powers as we see now? And what I feel is that this has set up that entire story to be explained in the future by Sui Ishida. The true story of what will happen with Choujin X begins now. And what we have seen up till now is the introduction or the prequel to set up that story that will be coming in the future chapters. And so chapter 24 is a very special one in that it closes the very first part of the story. And it explains many things for the setup, but at the same time it opens many questions for the readers to look forward to. And so it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward. And once the next couple of chapters comes out, I will bring up the next video. And I hope you join me at that time. And I hope we start understanding how this story will move on. But thank you very much for watching this video. This was the chapter 24 discussion for Choujin Next. And until the next episode, happy manga reading. And as always, Jaya, nice day, everyone.